Actually, we are on session number 2, so welcome to session number 2. We are talking about international actors and religious freedom. So I will try to introduce the persons that are already on the floor. I will start with Anastasia Hartmann. Is an advocacy officer at Open Doors International, working in Brussels to promote freedom of religion and defend religious minorities within European institutions. Thank you very much, Anastasia. We have Jonathan de Leyser. Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan is a board member of the European Platform Against Religious Intolerance and Discrimination and Europe Liaison Officer for Christian Solidarity Worldwide, focusing on advocacy for freedom of religion. We have now Ivan Arjona Pelado, is president of the non-governmental organization Committee on Freedom of Religion or Belief at United Nations Office at Geneva, coordinating civil society and promoting fundamental rights. Thank you. We also have Juan José García Carreño. He's a human rights policy officer at the European External Action Service, contributing to the development and implementation of European external human rights policy. Thank you. Michael Wiener, thank you, Michael, is head of the Human Rights Treaties branch at the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, leading global efforts on treaty implementation and dialogue between religion and human rights. And finally, Maksym Krupskyi. Maksym is the Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty in Seventh-day Adventist Church in Ukraine, working on church and state relations, interfaith dialogue, and promotion of religious freedom. As a commentator, we have João Martins. We have not a chair for you, but at the end you will join us. João Martins is the director of ADRA Europe. ADRA means Adventist Development and Relief Agency in Europe. We have 3 questions for each one of you, so we don't have much time, but I appeal for your synthesis to all the questions that we prepared. We will start with Anastasia, Open Doors International. Open Doors has a very comprehensive yearly report on religious freedom. What is Open Doors' assessment of religious liberty trends today?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, let me start by saying that at Open Doors, I'm responsible for EU advocacy. So I am based in Brussels, and I speak on freedom of religion or belief matters before the European institutions. We are a global faith-based organization. Our vision is to support Christians that face human rights violations on account of their faith. Our advocacy message is always non-partisan, and our advocacy calls are meant to benefit communities at large, not just Christians. So we speak into the principle of FoRB, or freedom of religion or belief, for all. And indeed, every year, one of the advocacy tools that we use extensively is our annual report, which is titled the World Watch List. The World Watch List is a result of an extensive research work, which includes grassroots incident reporting, in-country research, monitoring of more than 100 countries, to eventually come up with a list of 50 countries where it is hardest to be a Christian. And then this report informs our advocacy efforts, whether it's at the EU, but also at the United Nations, and as well as nationally. I'm not going to go into how we come up with the 50 countries. 50 is actually just for the presentation purposes. Like I said, we monitor more countries than that. But just to say that the report highlights places where either state or non-state actors commit religious freedom violations against Christians, and oftentimes it actually demonstrates a larger pattern of FoRB violations, which may impact other religious communities or individuals. So if I focus on some of the trends, let me start first with the fact that, well, contexts in which religious freedom violations occur become increasingly complex. It can be a protracted crisis, it can be political instability, it can be a humanitarian crisis. Extreme persecution often occurs in situations where it can be conflict zone of great strategic significance for some of the countries, and as a result, freedom of religion or belief as an issue in itself gets either overlooked or, let's say, considered insignificant, like, for example, it is sometimes the case with Nigeria, or because of geopolitical interests, intentionally not addressed. And I'm thinking here, for example, of the recent free trade agreement that the EU concluded with India. Despite a huge, extensive advocacy effort, it lacks enforcement mechanism for human rights clauses and any sort of product monitoring on human rights. Generally, this complex crisis, complex situations make our advocacy very difficult, because to bring FoRB at the table, well, is simply quite challenging, considering that governments may be tackling complex issues and maybe overlooking human rights developments, and the reality is perpetrators of religious freedom violations are well aware of it. Of course, I cannot commit mentioning the rise of digital persecution and the use of AI, surveillance, the use of drones. The implications on FoRB of these technologies are only beginning to be discussed, but we see it as an increasing trend. Of course, the first place that comes to mind is China, but this trend is growing in its scope geographically and both in its intensity. We also see increased attacks on religious leaders, either by authoritarian governments to silence dissent. Nazila earlier mentioned the situation in Nicaragua, or again by extremist violence, like the case, for example, in the sub-Saharan Africa. We monitor the overlapping rights, so it can be freedom of religion or belief and freedom of assembly. There are places where governments simply shut down local Christian gatherings, which produces both chilling effects on whole communities or drive people into isolations. And I'm specifically thinking here about North Africa. And finally, the trend that I would like to mention, which often gets not really overlooked, but we don't, it just is quite challenging in terms of advocacy, so we don't talk about it that much, but actually it's the foundation of what FoRB stands for, is the issue of converts. And by converts, I mean people who choose to adopt, change, or abandon their religion or belief. The work with recent converts makes up a huge chunk of what Open Doors does on the local and field level. And as you can imagine, apostasy and blasphemy laws are still being enforced, sometimes to the point of awarding a death sentence to a person or leading to violent mob attacks. As it has been mentioned, FoRB does not protect religions or traditions, it protects an individual. And so the individual right of choosing or changing or adopting a certain religion or belief is at the foundation of what we stand for, so we should talk about it. And this is the trend that we see everywhere. People are driven underground simply because they don't have representation, because they do not belong to a recognized religion or belief minority. Did you know, for example, that in Iran, Persian-speaking Christians, so those who found Christianity as their new faith, this community is much bigger than traditional Christian communities, but they're just simply not represented. It's really given voice to the voiceless. I will probably stop here for the trends.
Okay, thank you very much, Anastasia. Ivan Arjona Pelado, you led a committee whose main task is to support and coordinate the work of non-governmental organizations accredited to the United Nations in Geneva. How do these organizations engage with the United Nations, and how effective is that relationship in advancing freedom of religion or belief?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. And just before I answer, I want to congratulate the AIDLR for the 80th anniversary. And thank you, all of those volunteers, translators who have been putting together this conference. It's really meaningful that you keep doing this. In fact, your organization is older than my very own religion. So congratulations for this. It is really a challenge to be effective, as you put in this question, on the work on freedom of religion or belief at the international organizations, especially because the space of that civil society is having is smaller, tighter and tighter. There are cuts everywhere offices that were being able to do a lot of work, a lot of coordination, they suddenly have less possibilities, less resources to do something. And on the other side, member states, they have learned how we work. So they have all types of ways of minimizing our space. The ways we have to become more and more intelligent, more and more strategic on how we raise up issues. And so in our committee in Geneva, I mean, we have atheists, we have Muslims, we have Adventists, we have Mormons, Scientologists, Baha'is, you name it, Buddhists, Hindus. So, and we don't find it difficult to work with each other, but it doesn't mean that we can always do it openly. We, in fact, as a committee, positive or not, we do not have a unified voice on issues. So what we do is more like a platform coordination, exchanging information, and sometimes when it is doable, we join initiatives to feed the special rapporteurs with additional information. But we manage to do things, we manage to influence, but again, states they seem to be less and less interested on FoRB, and they often come to the United Nations to say how nice they are, how good they are doing, and how bad everybody else is doing, right? So this doesn't make it easy, but this is the very reason why we need to continue working together, increasing, getting stronger, and putting aside our own differences that we have and that we should keep, but we should defend, we should continue defending the right of everybody else to freedom of religion. Because a colleague of mine, my colleague Eric, and I was like, wow, that's very true. The moment one person in a country does not have religious freedom, it means there is no religious freedom in this country. Because freedom of religious belief implies your right to change religion, to abandon religion. So if one specific religion is not allowed, then my very own right to change to that religion is already cut. Yeah? Anyway, I think that's, I would leave it for the...
Yes, we have further questions for you. Thank you. Thank you, Eva. Jonathan de Leyser, what is the European platform against religious intolerance and discrimination, and what kind of cooperation and coordination work does it carry out in Brussels?
Thank you, yeah. EPRID is a network of organizations committed to promoting FoRB at the EU level. This means we're very EU institution facing. Juan José is one of our victims quite regularly. And I'm pleased to say this year is also our 20th anniversary since we were founded, so maybe that could be added to Nazila's sum of anniversaries. To summarize our role, I think we can do that in 3 parts. The first is to remind, the second inform, and the third persuade. So we work to remind the EU of its commitments, not only its commitments to international law, obviously, but also to the things that it's agreed internally itself. The Council of the EU has agreed guidelines on the promotion and protection of FoRB around the world, which it completed in 2013. EPRID was one of the organizations involved in shaping these and helping to craft them. And we also put on an event at the time of the anniversary, the 10th anniversary of the guidelines as well. This challenge of, or this role of reminding the EU of its commitments can be challenging sometimes. I think partly because of the nature of, just the organizational nature of things, of officials moving on every few years and so on, and sort of institutional memory. But we carry on. The second role, I think, is to inform. Our members have good information, which I think is valued by the EU institutions and by member states, particularly in a time when facts can be difficult to verify. And so I mean, this looks like when the EU undertakes missions to third countries, human rights dialogues, special envoy visits, or if the Parliament has resolutions, we try and input into that, into those processes. And thirdly, persuade. Per the EU's treaties, the Lisbon Treaty, for example, the EU pursues its values and its interests. And I noticed on the program that quote of AIDLR's founder of "We are about principles, not interests." And I think one of the challenges we have in persuading the EU to uphold FoRB is to explain how its values are its interests. And I mean, this is not there are many ways that we can sort of go into this, but I think it's a case sometimes of trying to enter into the calculations that the EU is making and to have frank conversations about the reasonings that they undertake in their foreign policy, in their trade policy, and also domestically. I want to say also, I mean, overall, the EU is, I think, a helpful actor in many respects on FoRB. There's lots that we celebrate about what it does. I mean, it's the pen holder for UN resolutions on FoRB that that renew the mandate of the UNSR. FoRB is in some cases prioritized in its human rights policy. They have a special envoy on FoRB, and the EUSR for human rights has also historically been active. But I think there are still challenges on political will very often, and sometimes administratively. I mean, for example, the special envoy for freedom of religion or belief, we have gaps of an average of 15 months between mandates. So these are the sorts of things that we try and push along.
Thank you very much. Juan José García Carreño, you are also based in Brussels. As an officer for human rights at the European Union level, what is the role and what tools does the European Union have in defending and promoting freedom of religion or belief?
Thank you very much, and I would like to echo what my colleague has said before. Thank you to AIDLR for organizing this event, and especially to Paolo and to Mercedes, who have been my contact points, and they have invited me to this event for which I am grateful. So I work in the European External Action Service, so that means as a European official I'm working as diplomat in the diplomatic part of the house. And even before, but especially since the Treaty of Lisbon, we have a clear mandate of promoting a foreign policy. We have the High Representative established in the treaties, and since the Treaty of Lisbon, the service where I work, the European External Action Service, was created. There is when we are trying to steer for the establishment, little by little, with progressive steps of foreign policy in all areas, including human rights. We have a clear objective in the Treaty of the European Union to promote internationally human rights. That's when we play a role. We develop together with all the member states that they have to decide on unanimity what is going to be the common foreign policy, and in this case human rights, and in this case FoRB. That's where we enter in the external action on how we are going to have a voice as European Union, especially in the United Nations. and promote this right. So, as a European Union, one of the things that we do at the United Nations is presenting these resolutions on freedom of religious belief. That means for us it's important. It's today is the only thematic resolution at UN Human Rights Fora that we present alone. We are also involved with other partners in other thematic resolutions, and we present country-specific resolutions. But as thematic resolution, today we have a freedom of religious belief. That already means a lot of the importance that we are giving to the as European Union to this right. Through the resolution we present in Geneva, we can have today Anastasia with us today as a special rapporteur, because it's currently today is through the resolutions presented by the European Union that we establish and we prolong this mandate of special rapporteur for freedom of religious belief. And then soon after the Treaty of Lisbon, we established a tool, a political tool that is going to consolidate what is our foreign policy in terms of the right to freedom of religious belief. That is what Jonathan mentioned, is the EU guidelines on the promotion and protection of freedom of religious belief. That already establishes a clear political line among all 27 member states. At the time it was just 28. That is going to guide our action at a global level on how we are going to protect this right. That one of its manifestation is, and we have it, is at the UN Fora, that apart from this resolution, we speak out on the protection of religion belief across the world, and also we have other different diplomatic tools. Jonathan mentioned one of them, that is the human rights dialogues. Today we have established formal human rights dialogues with more than 60 countries and international organizations. We don't have all of them every year, but we have every year we manage to have between 30 and 40. We have an agenda in these human rights dialogues, and we have to select what are the topics we are going to discuss. Freedom of religious belief is present in more than 20 of these dialogues. It depends on the priorities. We are going to agree. There are dialogues with certain countries of the world where we have other kinds of concerns. But for instance, when we have dialogues with countries in the Middle East, North Africa, Asia, this is one of the recurrent topics that we have together with other human rights. Then we have our diplomatic action. We have a special representative for human rights that the position is since 2012. Currently, it's Ms. Kajsa Ollongren, former minister in the Netherlands, and she has the mandate of promoting all human rights, including the right to freedom of religious belief. For instance, when she has traveled to Egypt recently, she has the topic. It depends on the countries, but she's going to bring the policy and discuss issues whenever there are violations or abuses of human rights, and in this concrete case of the right to freedom of religious belief, discrimination towards people belonging to religious minorities. She's going to address this topic to the authorities of the countries. We don't have the position of a special envoy for freedom of religious belief. Currently is vacant. The current plans we have is that the appointment is imminent. But again, it's another person who's going to represent the European Union outside the European Union and promote this right across the world. The former special envoy, Frans van Dalen, visited Pakistan, and there in that visit discussed about a lot of challenges related to freedom of religious belief, to discrimination of minorities. What is the issue of what is the problem with the application of blasphemy law in the countries? What is the situation of different minorities, especially the Muslim Ahmadis? So we talk about these things. We also have, as diplomatic service. I'm based in Brussels, in the headquarters, but we have 145 EU delegations across the world. They are accredited to all countries, except Iran and North Korea, but and we have also delegations accredited to international organizations, such as in Geneva, New York, we have the delegations accredited to the United Nations. All my colleagues in the delegations are going to go to the governments in different demarches, different discussions, current discussions. They are going to address these topics. As a European Union, we work very closely with civil society. We are grateful for the work that civil society works. We have heard as the civil society space is shrinking. This is what we are seeing that is happening, and we are fighting for keeping the space open. For instance, in the United Nations, there are many states actors wanting to restrict the participation of civil society. We advocate for the opposite, because it's important to have civil society. So we work and we open our doors to civil society, both in Brussels and both in the EU delegations, because we need civil society in order for us to be aware of the problems. They work at grassroots levels. They bring the problems that happen in every part of the world, and they make us aware. And that we will use it in order to address different issues with the governments. And then I work in the European External Action Service, but there is another institution, that is the European Commission, that is the one implementing the budget of the European Union. And they are the ones that are going to figure out what different kind of projects and actions can fund in order to promote the right to freedom of religious belief. In 2023, there was a call for proposal, a global call for proposals that after which two big projects were awarded. One to implement a specific project on the right to freedom of religious belief and how to overcome discrimination based on religious belief in 3 countries in Africa, in West Africa, and then another one on promoting the right across different Asian countries. These are different ways on which we can implement the policy that we have through the guidelines, the policies, the financial instruments that we approve after we have every multi-annual financial framework of the European Union approved, and then we have the tools to fund actions in countries. These are ways and tools that we have as European Union in order to human rights and this concrete human rights, that is the right to freedom of religion or belief.
Thank you very much, Juan. Michael Wiener, you are a privileged observer of FoRB trends from the United Nations side, working closely with civil society. In a world where multilateralism is under strain due to international documents, treaties and declarations still carry real weight in protecting religious freedoms.
Many thanks for first the perfect organization here and also for this question, and just to really to respond directly to the underlying concern about the lack of implementation or the pushback against human rights. Of course, that is something that we see at the global level, but let me give you, and I always try to see questions from a positive side, I want to give you 3 concrete examples where actually these international conventions, declarations have had weight and have had positive impact. So the first example I want to share with you, and everything is in the public domain, so I can easily share that, is the question of conscientious objection to military service, something which we already alluded to earlier today, which is part of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief, Article 18, both the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. And to give you the concrete example of the Republic of Korea, where for decades the right to conscientious objection to military service was not recognized. Several treaty bodies like the United Nations Human Rights Committee, like the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion or Belief, have repeatedly brought up this question. There's a quadrennial report by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights explaining that this needs to be really implemented. And following also national jurisprudence, Constitutional Court, this ultimately 5 years ago was recognized. And this means that, for example, more than 100 of applicants to the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations who had shared their complaints were actually provided with the possibility of serving alternative service, where there are also some additional questions, but at least there is, you can see an impact of the legal obligations under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, what the treaty bodies, what the Special Rapporteur said, what the High Commissioner's Office said, and then the concrete impact for example, Jehovah's Witnesses, who are the vast majority, but also other Christians in the Republic of Korea. The second positive example is the question of children in Senegal who are part of religious madrasas. Some of them are actually exploiting them for begging. So they're not providing really the education, but they are sending them on the streets. And this is really quite an open problem, which again has been identified, and there were concluding observations by the Human Rights Committee, by the Committee on the Rights of the Child, by the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, by the Committee Against Torture. The Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture made a visit to Senegal. Special rapporteurs in their reports raised it repeatedly. And in response to all these recommendations, concluding observations, the government, for example, also responded that they had identified also the problem and then taken more than 1,000 of the children off the streets to basically also prevent that they are exploited for these begging purposes and deprived of their right to education and all other host of rights. And the third example, also in view of the time, which was again alluded to earlier on, blasphemy law, where for centuries in England and Wales there was the common law offense of blasphemy and blasphemous libel, which admittedly was only protecting Christianity or even only the Anglican Church. So that was identified also as a discriminatory provision. And there was the question, should this discriminatory provision be extended to all, so to protect all religions against blasphemy, or basically to repeal, abolish this common law offense of blasphemy. And that was when the predecessor of Nazila, Azma Jahangir, went on a country mission to the United Kingdom in 2007. This was a live debate because the House of Commons and House of Lords was really actively discussing these two options. And in her report to the Human Rights Council, the Special Rapporteur was very clear by saying, as was already mentioned earlier on, it's basically individuals and groups who are protected under human rights, and it's not ideas or religions as such. And at the time, the United Kingdom had also just adopted the act to protect against incitement to religious hatred, targeting individuals and groups. So that kind of gap was just filled. So her recommendation was very clearly to say, you have this protection of individuals and groups, so you should actually repeal, abolish the common law offense of blasphemy, which was very quick, less than a year after that report and visit, and with explicit reference to her recommendation, the parliament actually abolished that, which to me is very important because it's not only in England and Wales in that concrete sense, but also in colonial times, these blasphemy prohibitions were also exported by in other Commonwealth countries. So, for example, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India have basically inherited these initial blasphemy prohibitions. So to basically repeal it also in England and Wales is very positive in the sense of avoiding this whataboutism. So we inherited and basically it's still prohibited in England and Wales. So that argument is basically... So just these three examples to show that, of course, there are problems in terms of non-implementation or double standards, but the importance is to implement what is actually an obligation under international human rights law.
Thank you, Dr. Wiemer, for these three examples. Maksym Krupskyi, you work as the religious liberty leader for a church in a country at war, Ukraine. How relevant is religion in a conflict situation?
Thank you for your question, and it's a great honor for me to be part of this panel and to feel real compassion from all this group when you hear about Ukraine, because this war, it's not only a fact that we know that it's a war in Ukraine for many years, from 2014, and full-scale invasion from 2022. It's a real tragedy for millions of people, still going not far from here. And in the beginning of war, religion was great unifying factors for people. Churches was overcrowded with people. And also in the first year of war, we saw the great potential of religious organization in the humanitarian area. And even now, when we have a lot of projects in the humanitarian area, many of them were founded or based on religious organization. Also, we can say about advocacy work of religion group or religion organization in Ukraine, especially you heard about all Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organization. Members of this council travel a lot and try to advocacy for Ukraine. But I also have to say that for religions itself, it's a time of great transformation in crisis. Because if in the beginning of war, the church was overcrowded, later, when the people facing tragedy, many of them decided to left church, and the churches has to be open, that people can change their mind, can change their beliefs, became discouraged about some things when their worldview is shaken. So for religion, as I say, religion in Ukraine is a great unifying factors, a great factor of resilience, but also it's going through personal, or not personal, yes, personal, but also religion itself became a big crisis and big transformation.
Thank you, Maksym. we are back to you, Anastasia. As a faith-based organization, what are the main challenges a non-governmental organization like Open Doors faces in bringing freedom of religion or belief to institutions and public attention?
Yeah, thank you. Well, we go back to Brussels because I speak from the European side of things, let's say, and I made some notes, but most of the challenges or trends have already been mentioned by the distinguished participants in the first panel, but I will just reiterate them from the field, let's put it this way, as an NGO. But it's not a secret that religious freedom is an extremely divisive matter. And on different sides of the political spectrum, it can be perceived very differently. Can be put in a certain narrative which may benefit one side or the other. And of course, in such climate, it's very difficult to bring in our data and to try and bring conversations about the religious freedom into the human rights dimension. Because, you can imagine that from our point as Open Doors, speaking on persecuted Christians may not even help in this type of climate. When we publish our data, it is in the public domain. So when people access it, it can easily be referenced in public debates at the European Parliament, in reports, in all sorts of statements, in media articles, and we cannot control the narrative. That's the bottom line. And sometimes this is our biggest challenge, because when we come to a meeting with a politician, or sometimes even the European official, they already have a certain preconceived idea about what Open Doors may be standing for, because they saw that article, because they saw those amendments being submitted by that very ultra-right group, for example. So we have to always bring it back to what we actually try to convey when we publish our data, what we do when we advocate for freedom of religion or belief for all. Every time it is an uphill battle, depending on who you meet, and that essentially comes from the side of the European Parliament, because when you look at the, let's say, public debate happening in the European plenary, mentioning religious freedom or persecution of Christians fuels controversy. Not mentioning it is an active political position. So it gets very, well, in a way it does get instrumentalized, and practicing advocacy in this stage is not easy. It's always sort of trying to gain your seat at the table and trying to present, look, this is the data from the ground. We are not trying to fuel any sort of political debate. We are just trying to show that, well, this is the moral duty of us all to protect fundamental human rights, which is FoRB, and other human rights that come into play in many other contexts. And I think the bottom line here is that we are usually confronted with the fact that our counterparts at the European Union may misunderstand freedom of religion or belief and the use of religions. And I think it was already mentioned today that it takes some sort of literacy to operate in these terms. And this is something that we always have to bring to the meeting, to be ready to go back to the basics and explain to them what we talk about when we talk about FoRB. So that's one big challenge. And maybe just to mention one other challenge that we see at the European Union side of things is that we often feed information, and we go at great lengths to provide data, to provide text for certain briefings or recommendations for consultations, but we do not often hear back. So we do not hear whether it was a success story, whether it was mentioned to a third country when the EU participated in a human rights dialogue in some sort of like a bilateral meeting, whether that mention of religious minorities in a certain country has made any effect in EU advocacy when they come with their human rights agenda to another country, whether it has done any progress. We receive very little feedback, and sometimes it just can be slightly discouraging, because we try and do our best and be the partners of the EU, and Juan, who is doing a great job, and I think it's one of the encouraging parts actually, because we have a lot of feedback and a lot of communication back and forth, but it's not always the case. And as you have heard, the EU does have their responsibility to protect and uphold human rights, and it's not only reserved for the special envoy, whose position is now vacant. It's in the founding treaties, it's in the principles of the EU. Whether it goes further than just declaring it as principles, it's sometimes just very difficult to see.
Thank you. Ivan, Arjona, from the non-governmental organizations side, is there a really commitment to the principle of religious liberty as a common value? Or are organizations more focused on their own legitimate but specific interests?
This is very much of a trap question. But it's true that, as you say, it's legitimate to look for your own protection of your own community. And I do believe that we do have to become stronger to actually protect the religious freedom of everybody else. And in my experience, to defend the religious freedom of my community, sometimes it's quite in specific countries like Germany, Hungary, or even France, for example. It's very difficult to do it for your own. So sometimes it's even easier to work for the religious freedom of everybody else. And you are ensuring by doing this that your own community is going to benefit. But this is not always clear for everybody. It is not easy for everybody. I have myself once, won't mention which community, but I was like, I mean, this person is never willing to take a picture next to me or next to this other one, right? And I was like, wow, this is not okay. You know, we should all be brave and be standing by each other. And of course, I think this is how it should be. But sometimes the lives and the rights of your very own community, in an immediate basis, depends of who do you take a picture with. So then you have to hide. And so this is very sad that one has to do that, you know. But I have understood that this is where we are. This is not where we want to be. This is where we are. And it only shows how much we have to grow and to learn and enrich from each other. And going back to, we've been talking about definitions, you know, like who knows what is Scientology? Who knows what does it mean Adventist? Like many of us, maybe we know 10% about each other. So definitions and defining what we're working on, this is key. Defining what is freedom of religious belief. In fact, in our NGO committee in Geneva, we have now started a series of surveys to find out what actions the people from the committee need to learn to properly do their advocacy. Because we have many well-intended people, but who don't know the mechanism. And they're just there, they are there with their very good will and very good intention and strength, and putting money from their own pocket to travel to Geneva, to the UN, and then they don't get to speak. And maybe I could disagree with the way this person would be doing it, but this person is fighting for the rights of the community she's defending that are being violated, right? And so, yes, the people in the community, on the FoRB NGO communities, mostly, at least the ones I'm meeting with, they are people who truly, they're genuinely looking for religious freedom for everyone. But it's not always easy for them, and so they have to strategize. And sometimes, again, we do actions very much openly together, but many other times we have to hide behind walls, behind papers, behind other organizations, only because we have not grown enough together to be strong as one front and go there in the United Nations or in the European Parliament, European Commission, and say, look, we are all here together. If you touch one of us, you are touching all of us. And this is where I think that we have to go. We have to go to that. I know it's not immediate, but it's not immediate because some of us believe it's not ready. So it's, in my case, as chair of the NGO committee, so one of the tasks I have imposed myself is to help everyone to become stronger in this field so that they are not afraid of getting on a picture with somebody else, because then the rights of their community are going to be attacked.
Thank you. Jonathan, we are back to Brussels, and according to statistics, there are around 35,000 non-governmental organizations working there, some of them in the field of human rights. How do you manage this challenge of drawing attention to the topic, especially considering that religion is a matter of national competence according to the European treaties?
Yeah, I think there are a few ways to answer this question. It's kind of, how can we be heard in a very noisy room? And I want to focus on the value of collaboration. I think that's partly because it's much harder to ignore a group of organizations or communities than just one. So there's a sort of critical mass dimension to that. But I think we also need to be wide in our vision of how we can collaborate, not only amongst ourselves in our own sort of freedom of religion or belief kind of group, but to reach out. And I think, for example, of the wider human rights community. And I think a part of that, a part of what's important to achieve that is to show a level of sensitivity or awareness about the contexts that we're advocating for. And that doesn't mean being apologetic about FoRB, but it's just a case of I think it's not being petulant if FoRB is not always at the top of the press release in every single country, for example. I think this is important for credibility, for one thing, that we are promoting FoRB as a human right, and we are therefore primarily interested in human rights overall, and we're sensitive to that. I think it's also, it's just the right thing to do, and it's the coherent thing to do legally. But I think it can also help in terms of efficiency, in terms of how we decide where to allocate energy, efforts, resources. And just a reflection from in the previous session, sort of the danger of the hierarchy of rights was raised, and the possibility of sort of intersectionality as being an answer to that. And I think that's probably part of it, showing where FoRB intersects with other human rights, and that being a way to find new ways of promoting it.
Juan Carreño, in your point of view, what are the hotspots of religious freedom violations that the European Union is focusing on, and how can civil society cooperate in identifying and addressing them?
Okay, I think I replied partly in my previous intervention. I would like to say, when we focus on human rights as European Union, we focus on the whole world. We are not having country priorities. All the countries across the world are our priority. And then, whenever there are issues regarding human rights, we are there to address them. Linking with CSO, civil society, and here it's faith-based and non-faith-based organizations. They help us to become aware of these issues, and indeed, thanks to people coming and visiting me and raising certain problems. Just to give an example, I was aware of a particular problem that was happening in Norway, outside the European Union, and one of countries that we see as having better human rights records. But still, there are issues. There are issues within the European Union. The 27 member states of the European Union are not under my remit as working on the external action. But beyond that, all those countries are in my remit. So we are working from Norway. From Norway, we are working until countries North Korea, passing through all Middle East, Asia. There are many issues related to freedom of religious belief, related to discrimination based on religious belief. I think with the discussions that we will have also tomorrow in terms of religious nationalism, one of certain topics we will be discussed. But just to say that we work on all countries. It's not that we are just focusing on some of them. They are all under our remit. Maybe at some point we can have a more special focus on countries where we have a human rights dialogues, because then we can have a direct discussion with the countries, especially if we are going to put the topic of freedom of religious belief. But then, in terms of addressing human rights, we see all of them. Every year, the European Union publishes an annual report on human rights and democracy in the world. So the next, the one looking at what has happened in 2025 copy will be published soon during the spring. But there, I mean, we have a thematic analysis of what has happened in the world, but also we have a country outlook of what has happened. So all my colleagues in delegations, as in Brussels headquarters, are preparing a country analysis of what is the situation of human rights, and where the problem of religious belief is more prominent. There have been persecutions, clashes. It will be reflected in that in this annual report, because it's what we look at what we are doing as implementing the human rights and what is happening in the world. And just reiterating how civil society can help us. Come and visit us. Civil society, we welcome whenever we receive a report. Every CSO, we have their own views. They are focusing on different aspects. When we have CSOs that are focusing on just the right to freedom of your belief, for all, or maybe focusing on a specific religious group that can be a minority in whatever country, because it's just the part of the work that we can't work on everything, everybody is specialized. So they are very valuable for us. They help us to do our analysis on the work and to implement our policy.
Thank you. Dr. Wiener, we are back to you, and I would like to know, in your opinion, regarding the threshold of freedom of religion or belief specifically, what are the main threats to the progress in religious liberty that we witnessed over recent generations, and which challenges concern you most today?
Of course, there are several challenges and threats, but let me just pick out one which I find as the most demanding also to address, and that's precisely to find the threshold between freedom of speech and hate speech. Kind of that's the shorthand, but for the lawyers, it's basically the prohibition of advocacy of religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence. So that's what Ibrahim was also referring to earlier with the Rabat Plan of Action. And there, this is the fundamental question also what Jeremy asked us to really look into the definition. What is the definition of incitement to hatred in that context? And the Rabat Plan of Action, to me, is a fundamental tool to actually determine on a case-by-case basis with 6 specific questions that question, what is hate speech, what is free speech. And to give you a very concrete example of really a real case, and it's also in the public domain, it was in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, so already 20 years ago, where actually a bishop broke away from the mainstream Macedonian Orthodox Church. And that triggered some tensions in the country. And actually then the mainstream church was posting or basically inciting hatred and even violence against the breakaway group, which was 50 people or so. And because the country had so open and broadly formulated hate speech laws, the government, the courts just looked at the law and said, all right, there's hate speech, someone caused the hate speech, and that needs to be punished. So it ended up that the person who broke away, who actually caused hatred against himself and the small minority group that he founded, that he was convicted for 12 months, which was subsequently reduced to 10 months imprisonment, for actually inciting to hatred against himself and his group, which is very strange for anyone who thinks about it. But if you just apply the law and you don't actually have the 6-part threshold test of the Rabat plan of action, and you basically say that you need to be, who needs to be the victim or the target group? So I think that to me is a perfectly good example, because it's a bad example of how overbroad legislation or policies when it comes to hate speech actually can really backfire very badly. And that is, again, what the Rabat plan of action identified very clearly, that we have 2 problems, like 2 sides of one coin. The real cases of incitement to hatred, so those which are above the threshold, where all the 6 questions have been answered in the affirmative, many of those cases are not addressed because it's basically targeting minorities or whoever. So there it's not politically opportune to prosecute them. And on the flip side of the coin, you have those cases, like what I just talked about in the Macedonian context, where actually it is definitely below the threshold, so it's should not be prohibited, or basically not that person should be prosecuted. But there, the overbroad legislation is being used to actually target minorities, dissenters, sometimes it's political or religious leaders, mainly dissenters, for political purposes. So I think, to me, that is the biggest challenge. But again, we have all the tools, and actually they are being used, for example, by audiovisual media authorities, by the Oversight Board of Meta on social media for online content moderation. The European Court of Human Rights, Inter-American Court of Human Rights have been using the Rabat plan of action. So I think that, to me, shows if you give the guidance and if it's implemented in practice, it can be helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Wimner. We are going back to Ukraine, Maksym, Krupskyi. What are the main challenges you face in your church? And what about other communities as a member of an inter-religious dialogue platform?
Thank you for this question. First of all, I have to say that when we see these hybrid wars and attempt to weaponize faith, we have to check twice every information about religious freedom, because it can be part of propaganda and so on. But there are some few obvious things which is really challenging us. Now, first, it's access or limited access or no access to the occupied territory. And in many reports, we don't have real information what is happening there. From my information, there are almost no Protestant community left there. And it's a big challenges. I'm sure that it's a big challenges for religious freedom that place. Also, every country has their own problem, which has to be openly said about this. And for my community, especially painful, it's a situation with conscientious objectors in Ukraine. Maybe you heard about this famous case of Zelinsky. Dmytro Zelinsky, he spent in jail 2 years and now he's free. But from the past, we know that if we are not taking seriously some things into consideration, next day it will be more. So today I can announce another names: Andriy Sklyar, Igor Nosenko, Pastor Bondarenko. Andriy Sklyar, 5 years in prison for not following orders. Andriy Sklyar is waiting almost 1 year, waiting for trial. It's a conscious objectors in Ukraine. Pastor Bondarenko is freed on bail, but it's still a really challenging situation about this. So I hope that even in the war situation, there are always place for fight for religious freedom. It's always actual. We cannot just set aside some question and say, let's wait 1 more year, 5 more years, when war will finish, maybe we will find some solution. It has to be found now, because it's only from my comparatively small community, I named 3 persons. But it's other community like Jehovah's Witnesses and other from Baptist community, Pentecostal, who are conscientious objectors. In Ukraine, we have really gap in the legislative regulation. We don't have law about alternative service. And now it's like a long way to get this law in time and help these people who really face challenges and who want to serve their country, but with respect to their religious beliefs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maksym, and I want to thank you, all of you, for your answers, for your work. And I'm going to ask Dr. João Martins if you can come here and do your final comments, please.
Thank you, Ezequiel. Thank you, dear colleagues, and allow me to treat you like that, because at least 4 of you work also in NGOs like me, so I really appreciated your presentations, and thank you especially to the special invitees that are representing institutions here, the multilateral institutions, the EU and the UN. Thank you so much for your presentations. It is a challenge to summarize, but I was deeply enriched by everything that you have said, and I'll try to share some of my thoughts together with some of the thoughts that you brought to the table this afternoon as well. Thank you for the invitation. It's a privilege to be here. And listening to this panel, actually, I think we went, and thank you, Jonathan, for mentioning that, we went a bit further only from the religious freedom, but to other rights as well. Because we believe that if religious freedom is not respected, other rights are also violated. And I think that as we are discussing here these days, we need to have in mind exactly this, that there are many other rights that are also violated. But if we look at these rights, they are all grounded in something that is common, and it is human dignity. And thank you so much, Michael Wiener, for sharing some of the good examples on how human dignity is preserved through religious freedom, especially in the cases that you have presented in the Republic of Korea, in Senegal, and also even in Europe, in the UK and Wales with a blasphemy law. But when we look around, the situation is changing, and we don't, being honest and coming from the civil society organization, we see that there are many shadows around us. And what used to be relatively stable, that was based on the rules of law, and are now systems that are shifting. From a world of cooperation, we are coming to a world of transaction. And we see this very clearly when we see many cuts, and my organization comes from the humanitarian world, we see many cuts that come to the humanitarian and development cooperation. After 2025, with the dismantling of the US aid, the focus on solidarity has dramatically changed. And thank you, Ivan, for sharing with us that this is a challenge for many NGOs in our region here in Europe, because across the sector, we see that our space is shrinking. It's shrinking. Anastasia, you have referred that the environment is increasingly complex. Places where we work that are with more challenges in terms of human rights are also the places where they are more violated. So like where we have humanitarian crises, where we have all these kind of difficult situations. You also mentioned that data can be misused, and that's a big problem, especially with polarization. It is difficult to control the narrative, and there are many different narratives that can be taken out of the reports that we produce, like the one that you have presented here. Also, it is very challenging to do advocacy today. Also, Michael, you have referred to the definition and the difference between hate speech and freedom of religion. Thank you so much for bringing that challenge to the table this afternoon. This is also one of the challenges that is connected to the narratives. The narratives are changing, and it's difficult to understand what kind of narrative we are following. And thank you also, Maksym, for sharing about the misinformation. Yes, misinformation in the digital era is very important and relevant, and we need to take it in consideration when we are defending human rights. So the priorities are narrowing, and we need to support, as we support, and we need to be mindful that the system where we are working is changing dramatically, especially in Europe. When we look at the European organizations, we see that we are shifting aid for trade, we are shifting solidarity for security. It's a truly different mindset. And this has direct consequences on the human rights. Because rights will not exist in isolation, they depend on systems, on institutions, on long-term commitments. And these long-term commitments are very often kept by multilateralism. So, Juan, José, I want to thank you very much for sharing your openness and your faith in multilateralism, that the EU wants to keep respecting the EU treaties that defend human rights. You want to bring the issue also to other regions of the world, and you are doing that. Thank you so much for doing that. It's very important that the External Action Service of the EU is doing that. Also, you are fighting against CSO shrinking. I appreciate that you work with other NGOs. So maybe we will keep knocking at your door, and we hope that we will knock at other doors of your colleagues in Brussels, because that's exactly the opposite of what we are experiencing now. But when multilateralism, when these systems, when these institutions, when these commitments, when they weaken, the rights become more fragile. They are more selective, and sometimes they become like a business. They become negotiable. From the perspective of my organization, working with the EU and beyond, we see it very, very clearly. The communities do not experience the crisis of the multilateralism as a political concept, but they experience it in very practical ways. They see that they receive fewer protection, they receive fewer opportunities, and they have less rights and less dignity. We are not talking about big policy, but we are talking about people. And often, as a growing sense, people feel that they are forgotten. Some solutions were presented here, and I also thank you for the solutions that you have presented. Advocacy continues to be one, Anastasia and Jonathan. Thank you for that. Yes, we need to keep fighting or working together with our partners in the institutions, advocating for the rights of people. Collaboration, Jonathan, is very, very important. Yes, we need to reach not only within the organizations that we represent here, but also out to other organizations that work with different human rights that are not only the religious freedom. Also, Ivan, we need to be more creative. Yes, definitely. More creative and work in partnerships. Religious freedom is, yes, universal. You have mentioned that. It's for everybody. So we need to work together. I took that message very clearly from you. But I would like also to mention another solution. I'd like to bring it to the table as well. And it is that we may work more at the local level, that we may be more localized. As faith-based organizations, we are traditionally rooted to the communities. We are there, where the people are. Maksym, yes, you have mentioned that example in Ukraine, where the humanitarian work was provided by FBOs, because they are closer to the communities. And as we work actually closer to the communities, we are keener to defend the human rights and the religious of freedom of these communities. Allow me, please, this afternoon to quote Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the co-founders of AIDLR, when she said, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? Where is it? In small places, close to home." It's true. It's not in big rooms and beautiful meetings like this. It's close to home. It's locally. It's where our communities are represented. So allow me to close this panel this afternoon, asking you to be bold, but also to have hope in the future. We are not now in an easy situation, especially when we look around us, but we believe that if we work together, as you have mentioned, if we focus on the people that really see their rights challenged, and if we keep being stubborn in fighting for the rights of the people, we can be successful. Thank you for your presentation.